And I didn't mean for it to be a two-parter, but I had so much information. In fact, this was one of those lessons that as I was writing it, I was having to just decide what stays and what goes. I was really intending on getting through with it in one day. That didn't happen. I had to try to make some decisions on what stays, what goes. What can I keep in here that's needed? What can I get rid of? And to be honest, I wanted to keep it all, and I should have, considering we've now made it a 2-weeker anyway. But Titus 1:15 was our verse that it's more of a topical lesson, and we kind of used it as a jumping off point. But let me read Titus 1:15 to you once again, and then we'll kind of go through just the parts that we've already covered in a kind of like a refresh for all of us, because it's been a couple weeks, and I've slept since then, so I could use the refresh probably as much as you. All right, Titus 1:15. Unto the pure, all things are pure. But unto them that are defiled and unbelieving is nothing pure. But even their mind and conscience is defiled. And what Paul was helping Titus understand is, hey, to a Christian, to somebody that's sold out and wants to and desires to be like God and to be pure, all things are pure. You understand, not in the sense of, oh, that means we can do whatever we want, but in the sense of they're going to desire to keep things right. And those that are lost, undefiled, everything's going to be really bad. And so that really plays into social media. You see, social media is just simply a tool. It's a tool like anything else. I can take a hammer, and I can use that hammer for a good thing, like hammering in a nail. Simple. I can use that hammer for something bad, striking somebody in the head with it. We can all agree it's just a tool. How you use it makes all the difference, right? And so we've talked about how big social media is now. And social networking is just, it's insane. And we talked about how I just did Facebook, but how it's worth $430 billion. I can't even fathom that kind of money. And what is Facebook essentially? It's a way for people to talk to each other on the internet and to post. I mean, it really, when you boil it down, it's not something grandiose. But because of our society and the kind of people we are, it really does do well. So I didn't want to be, in my personal opinion, this is where I stand. I think I said this 2 weeks ago, but I'm an anti-social media guy, personally. Now, I don't begrudge anybody for using social media because, as I said, it's a tool. There's just some tools I choose not to use, and if other people want to use them, that's fine. If they're using them wrong, then I'd condemn them for that. But oftentimes when it comes to social media, I don't know if you're using it right or wrong because I don't have it anyway. And I made that decision in high school, and I didn't share this story, but we should have time. We'll see. It may be a 3-weeker. We'll see. All right. When I was in high school, when Facebook really just started, one of my friends had Facebook. His name was Jared. We were good friends. He was probably my best friend through middle school and early high school. I mean, we were over at each other's house almost every weekend. We went to church together and youth group together. So we were always together. And when he got Facebook and it got hacked by somebody, and I know there's teenagers in the room, but I'm not trying to be graphic, but he got hacked by somebody that changed his profile into a pornography profile. And he had like everybody in our church on it. So he exposed my pastor to it. He exposed, my pastor's wife, youth pastor, everybody. Now it wasn't him, but that's just one of the dark sides of social. And at that point I determined, because I knew I was going to be a preacher, I knew I was going to be in ministry, I thought, I'll probably be all right if I just stay away. I was never one to jump on the electronic stuff anyway. So I stayed away, and that was a big deal. Let me read just part of my introduction here. I'm not going to read all of it, but I think it's the 4th paragraph there. It says, I'm not about to tell you to get rid of your social media accounts, but it is the responsibility of every spiritual leader, be it a parent, a pastor, or whatever, to examine God's word and apply it to the reality of daily life in their generation. Yet many Christians have never seriously thought through a biblical philosophy and Christ-oriented approach to social communications over the internet. We don't even think that maybe we should see what the Bible says about that. But the Bible has the answers for everything. And so that was our determination. So I started with kind of the positives. What are some of the potential, and I say potential, because they're not always used that way, right? And the best what's that old phrase? It's like the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Mm-hmm. You can have a lot of good intentions with social media. Teenagers, you can have a lot of good intentions. Hey, I'm going to go off, or I'm moving away, I want to keep track. And by the way, a lot of people, even when I graduated college, are like, man, you're going to have to get on social media. We're never going to keep contact. I was like, don't worry, I probably will never change my cell phone. Just text me if you change yours. And the guys I want to stay in touch with, I managed to stay in touch with. And the ones I didn't, I lost them. And that was beneficial. So here's some of the potential blessings that we've already covered, so I'm not going to go into great detail. You can be a witness for Christ. Number one, or letter A there, a witness for Christ. You can witness to people on social media. It can be used for that. You can post scripture. You can talk about Christ. You can post your salvation testimony, those kind of things. You can do that, and that's not a bad thing at all. I would just encourage you to be careful as you do that for two reasons. One, you're going to get some hate. I think I expressed this too. Even our YouTube page, I have to constantly be on top of deleting comments. Because somebody will listen to a fragment of one of my sermons, they'll hear something I say, and then they'll throw hateful comments up. Now I can let that, I don't know these people, whatever. Now if it's one of y'all throwing hateful comments, I might talk to you, but it's just random people on the internet, and everybody gets brave behind the keyboard. And so if you are willing to be a witness for Christ, be willing to take the heat for it. By the way, God said we will. The world's going to persecute us and not like us. Letter B there, you can teach biblical principles. Next to propagating the gospel, perhaps the greatest passion of Paul's life was investing himself in younger Christians. He gladly gave himself to nurture the spiritual maturity of others. As Paul mentored Timothy, he specifically explained that each Christian is responsible to pass on the scriptural truths he has been taught. We talked about that 2 weeks ago. The internet, number 2 there, has opened tremendous potential for affordably and effectively sharing biblical truths to the entire world. I'll give an example. Our missionaries, the Millers, there in Serbia, what they have is business cards. They printed out a ton of business cards with QR codes on them. And so when somebody asks them, because they're obviously American, they're not even really fluent in the language yet, they're still working, going to a language school and those things. So when somebody asks them, what are you doing here? They've learned enough to know when they ask that, how to say, we're here, and I forget exactly what Brother Miller said. By the way, that's one of the great things. Brother Miller has a YouTube page that just keeps checking. He gave a 42-minute update a month ago or so. So 42 minutes of getting to tell us all that's going on in Serbia, all that's transpiring, all that they're doing. And as a preacher, it's like, man, I feel like I'm not just giving to this work, I'm invested in this work. But so he gives them QR codes and he said, here's what we're doing, we're starting church. They scan that and it's in their language explaining exactly what they're doing. That's social media because it takes them to a social media account that does that, maybe YouTube, I'm not sure. So there's the teaching biblical principles. Letter C, you can be an encouragement to others. We referenced a Proverbs 25:11, a word fitly spoken is like apples of gold and pitchers of silver. Growth in communication technology has greatly enhanced our ability to encourage others. My example for that was on our back table. Every month we have a different missionary of the month. It's the Burgets this month. And we have on the back table a piece of paper that we encourage everybody to sign and write some kind of encouraging note. Or just let them know you're praying for them, something, you're glad they went, whatever it may be. And what we do is, and I'll do it this week, I'll take that, I'll walk over here, I'll scan it into the printer, and I'll have it on a USB, and I'll walk back to my office, and I'll put it in the computer, and then I'll email that right to Brother Berger. And so there he opens it, boom. And there's that same sheet of paper, obviously not the exact same, because that would be mail, but snail mail. I'm not into it. I'd avoid it if I can. And so right there's the same sheet of paper. So in Japan, we are going to encourage the Burgets from Florissant, Colorado. By God's grace through technology. That's one of the ways. And so encouraging others, that's a great way. And letter D, communicate with family, friends, and co-laborers. And I understand a lot of people say, hey, I only use social media for family. I only use it to keep up with my family. And to that I say, hey, go for it. Just again, I know most of my family I'd have to not be friends on Facebook with or something. I'd have to deny their friend requests because of who they are and what they post and what they put on. That's one of those reasons where I had to weigh out the good and the bad. And I went, there's just too much bad for me personally as a pastor. And so I didn't go for it. But if that's one of the ways, that can be a blessing. So we did start the pitfalls, and so I'm going to kind of go through the first few of these somewhat quickly, but I want to give all the pitfalls again. So number 2, the potential pitfalls of social media. Roman numeral number 2. Letter A, there's a bragging and focusing on self. So if you have not noticed, if you've been around teenagers that do have social media, they're kind of selfish. I don't even know if they know how to talk about anything but themselves. Because that's all that they have been geared to do. They're making TikToks about themselves. They're posting Snapchat about themselves. They are posting pictures on Instagram and videos on Instagram about themselves. They are putting their best foot forward on Facebook about themselves. And so, and I said this, as a teenager, we really didn't even take selfies. That wasn't a thing, to take a picture of yourself, because to take our flip phones and turn them around, and they had no camera on the front, and you couldn't really, the buttons weren't like really made for it, and they were not shaped for it, so you're kind of working it, and we didn't do it because that wasn't something you did. Any picture you had was a picture that somebody else took of like a whole group. It wasn't something you did of yourselves. But really, social media has turned us in very inward. 1 Peter 5:5, number 2, under letter A there says, be clothed with humility, for God resisteth the proud and giveth grace to the humble. Here's a problem. As a Christian, you're not supposed to be focused on yourself. No, I know the temptation. By the way, it's still good to check not to be overly focused, but to put some effort into how you look. I did shave this morning. I did make sure what hair I have left is in the right direction. I did make sure my clothes weren't all stained or whatever it may be. I try my best to avoid my daughter, so I wasn't glitter covered today. All those things are things you should do, but really it's so that you are not a distraction. That's my goal is when I preach. The reason why my tie is almost always the same, it's very tight knot, is because it doesn't usually move, because I don't want to be that guy that's preaching with his tie over here and everybody's not listening because they're like, man, does he know his tie is over there? Does he realize that this is going on? And so I try not to do those things. Don't want to be a distraction. So we have to pay attention to how we look, but we can't be too focused on ourselves. Number 3, I said this. There can be pride and self-gratification in how many friends or followers a person attains on his social media networking sites. For many, this becomes nothing more than an enlarged identity crisis born out of insecurity and self-thought. We talked about a model who was a Miss America or at least in the running for Miss America, who killed herself. She had millions of people who were following her on all of her social media platforms that I'm sure every time she put a picture up told her how beautiful she was and how great she was, and yet she still killed herself. You say, why? Because social media turned her inward. She never felt like she was pretty enough. She never felt like she was enough. By the way, I have this personal opinion. I can't prove this. Part of what's happening in our society with the change in dating. Okay, you take it back to when I was in high school, really pre-social media. We had MySpace. We did. I remember MySpace. Go look it up. I'm probably still on there, I'm sure. But we had MySpace, but that wasn't really that great. And then Facebook, as I said, came along when I was kind of later in my years in high school. But you had your dating pool, if I can call it that, was the people you knew physically. That's not how it works anymore. You see, social media also extends into dating apps and things of that nature. And a big reason, I believe this with all my heart, a big reason why young people, I'm talking 20-year-olds, 25-year-olds, sometimes even 30-year-olds, people my age, refuse to settle down with somebody is because they're always thinking there is somebody better. Because they see a lot of profiles. And because people put their best foot forward on a profile, why would a girl go for the guy next door when there's a guy that constantly posts pictures from the gym? He looks like he's in great shape. He's got this great job, so it appears. He seems like this great guy that she may one day run into, or she may one day be matched with on Tinder. Do you understand? And so there's this idea that I'm never going to settle because there's always something better, but they don't ever just take seriously the people that they actually know because they think there's something better that they can attain to out there. There's people that date out of the country, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that except for the sense of it's hard to really build a relationship. You don't know people from out of the country as well as you'd hope. Instead of pulling from a pool right around you. You say, well, what does all that matter? All I'm saying is that's kind of a side effect of social media. I'm not saying I settled it all. I tricked Holly, and I'm so glad I did, and I scored big. I did. But if I had if I was as a teenager, I had apps that showed me all the women that were around me within a 30-mile radius, I don't know if I would have ever met Holly even, because I probably wouldn't have given her the time of day because it wasn't important to social network in person. You do it on the internet. So does that make sense? That was kind of a freebie there. Letter B, it creates a false identity, creation of a false identity. The internet provides opportunity to pretend to be someone you're not. It allows you to dabble in fantasy and disconnect from reality. Many people propagate imaginary identities online, usually to the exclusion and ultimate devastation of real family relationships. I downloaded a bunch of sermons for the drive because I like to listen to sermons because I like to listen to preaching and enjoy it. And I was listening to this guy, and he's around 50, and he's got 2 daughters that are both early 20s. And he said this, and I was like, I'm stealing that. He said, a young man that is from 16 on that doesn't work a job but plays 3 hours of video games every day and delves into these fantasy worlds and doesn't actually care about real things, doesn't even get to date my daughter. Like, doesn't even get the chance to take her out on a date. You're already shut off. And I was like, that's good. Yeah, but the reality is that's what online is too. We put these, and you say, well, I'm using my face and my name, but you're not being you. And anybody that knows social media knows most people on social media aren't who they say they are. Because we want to portray our life as either perfect, which none of us have. Nobody has a perfect life. Holly and I are pretty close. The rest of you probably fail, but I mean, we're trying. Nobody has a perfect life. So you don't post when you're yelling at the kids. You post when they're behaving, or when you don't post what you look like first thing in the morning, do you? No, you put a bunch of makeup on, and then you get the right lighting, and then you got to get the right angle. And so they promote themselves as this person that's not real. It's all fantasy. It's all really, it's fantasy. I said all these things. I don't want to take too much of your time. But here's why. Letter C. Time wasting and distraction. We talked about this one a couple weeks ago. Ben Franklin said this: time is the stuff that life is made of, therefore do not squander it. Don't squander it. There's nothing productive, really that productive, that happens on social media. In fact, it's usually a hole. That's the design. Why TikTok is so big is because they've designed these 5-10 second videos that get you to scroll again, get to show you another ad, get you to scroll, and it's just, you think, oh, I'll watch 10 of them, that's only a minute. And before you know it, when we had family over and we told them, hey, because there's no TVs in the bedroom, hey, if you want to watch TV, here's how you work it. They're like, oh, don't worry, we can scroll TikTok for hours. That's exactly what they said. I'm pretty sure that's exactly what they did. They went to the bedroom, both laid next to each other in bed, and went, share. And they did that probably for hours. And there's people that scroll through Facebook for hours. And if you've got hours to waste, go for it, but I don't think any Christian does. For 2 reasons. One, your time's not your own. My time's not my own. My time belongs to God. If you believe that you're bought with a price, you're born again, then your time belongs to a higher power. He needs to have control of what you do. And what do you think is more beneficial? Scrolling through Facebook or TikTok or Twitter, or reading a book? Reading the Bible. Going and just knocking. You could knock 2 doors in your neighborhood in 10 minutes maybe? I'm giving y'all some credit if your neighbors are far away, because I've figured out how door knocking works around here. You could go witness 2 people in 10 minutes, or you can scroll Facebook. It's a time waster. Let me read what I said here real quick. The internet and social media tend to pull more time of your life than they deserve. Much of the time people spend on using these tools is nothing more than idleness and the wasteful expenditure of life. This is important. Many companies don't allow their employees access to social networks at work simply because of the loss of productivity. There are billions of dollars lost in America workplaces annually because of the people participating in needless online conversations while they are on the clock. Nothing worse than the McDonald's worker making a TikTok video instead of just taking your order. And that's what they're doing back there. They're piddling. And in fact, a big technology advancement has been the blocking of data. Buildings that you cannot get internet into. That's a big thing now. However they do that, I'm not tech savvy, but they've come up with ways that once you walk into these buildings, you're basically zero dark 30. You can't do anything. And they have to create these things because people, by the way, are addicted to social media. So how do people get addicted to like a phone? You're talking like an addiction like you would get addicted to a drug. It's literally the same. Because The novelty, what our brains love, what releases the chemical called dopamine into our brain. Dopamine makes you feel good. There's a lot of things that produce dopamine. Dopamine comes by working out. Dopamine comes by intimacy, which should be between a husband and wife. I just want to clarify that. Dopamine comes by new things. You ever gone to a new store? It's like, this is so cool. You remember walking into Shields for the first time? I'm sure everybody can identify. Well, you need to go. It's pretty awesome. And you walk in, you're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And then you're like, man, oh, look, they got a whole toy. You know, what that is a dopamine rush. What social media gives you is a dopamine rush. You scroll to the next video, scroll to the next video, scroll to the next, and it's dopamine, dopamine, dopamine. And literally, it rewires your brain. And I don't have time. I did a whole long, drawn-out study on the brain, and it was for addiction to pornography, if I'm just going to be blunt. It was for addiction to pornography. I read multiple books, did multiple studies. And one study that I found was mice have the same dopamine kind of rush we did. And so they taught these mice that there was a button, if they pushed the button, they got a dopamine rush. And then after the mice got to the point, they wouldn't leave the button. They just stay by it. So then they moved the mice and they put something that would kill them in front of it. An obstacle that would kill them. They would have to burn their feet. They would have to electrocute themselves to get to the dopamine, and the mice would still do it. Because that's to show you that's how powerful addiction is. That's why people struggle and the difference in somebody that's addicted to social media and somebody addicted to heroin, if you just strictly look at their brain, it's no different. They will do whatever it takes to get it. The only difference is nobody's shaming social media users for using it. Nobody's shaming the guys that are watching pornography for doing it. It's become normal in our society. People still kind of look down on heroin users. That's the only difference. But it does the exact same thing to your brain. And here's a cool tip for you. Here's what helps. Here's what helps addiction. Reading and meditation. What are the two things God wants us to do with His Word? Read it and meditate on it. Isn't that cool? It's just a freebie for you. This was an addiction study, but there you go. All right. I want to read Ephesians 5:16, which is under number 3. Redeeming the time because the days are evil. We don't have a lot of time. Time spent, number 4 there, time spent in social networking can be a terrible distraction from more important and essential relationships and responsibilities. You must know where to draw the line. Determine not to allow yourself to participate in social networking to the neglect of your family, your marriage, or your primary God-given responsibilities. And by the way, this just speaking to married couples, a big problem with intimacy in relationships now is not the fact that they don't want to be intimate. It's they get in the room with television or social media and they just ignore each other. Say, well, is that so bad? Yeah. Paul said, defraud not you one another except for a consented time of prayer and fasting. Your body does not belong to you, it belongs to the other. You should be doing it all the time as a married couple. That's what the Bible says. I know we got teenagers letting you guys know. Once you're married, you can do it all the time. All right, letter D is where we left off, and now we only got like 12 minutes. Here we go. Communication interruptions. There are few things more frustrating than attempting conversation with a teenager who is obsessed with text messaging, yet I've seen adults act just as obsessive with Twitter and Facebook. You ever gone to a restaurant and just watched a family that none of them actually communicate with each other, not a word? They're all literally looking at their own screen. And when the waitress comes, it's like, oh, are you ready? They're like, yeah, and they don't even know what they want because they didn't even take the time to sit down and read the menu. Because the moment they sat down, some alert came that told them that somebody liked their Facebook post, somebody liked their Instagram, somebody tweeted them, so whatever it may be. These people are allowing communication tools to become a barrier to personal relationships. By the way, I would call real relationships. They're a barrier not just to personal, but real relationships. Do your family and friends fear that your time together will be continually interrupted by an online notification from a friend? By the way, I really don't think some of my siblings and my wife's siblings, I don't know if they know how to communicate without a phone. Meaning like the only things they know to talk about is to show you things they see online. Other than that, they don't even know how to just carry on a conversation. They have to talk about it. That's it. If they're not talking about work, they're talking about social media because it's the only two things they actually do and they know to talk about. It's kind of scary. Determine to give your best and most attention to building the personal relationships God has entrusted to you. In some instances, social networking can complement and augment these relationships, but don't become so infatuated with the gadgets or the technology that it robs you and others of real relationships. You know what my grandparents appreciate more? When I just call them and talk to them for an hour over if I like something they put on Facebook. I don't think either of my grandfathers have social media. I think my grandma might, though. I don't know. Go grandma, whatever. I know she'll use it right. Letter E, materialism. If we step back and surveyed all of your social networking context, what would you find? Would your posts generally be more focused on material or spiritual aspects of your life? Now, of course, I'm not accusing you. I'm just saying if you have social media, think about what is it that's on your social media account? Is it things spiritual or is it things material, physical? Many people post more about possessions, career, successful achievements, favorite clothing brands, entertainments, sports figures than about God's work in their lives. This type of communication publicly reveals a heart of materialism and worldly infatuation. What comes out of your mouth is just what's in your heart, folks. What comes out of your social media is just what's in your heart. That's why people get on there to show off their new gear. People get on there and post their new car. People will post pictures of the side-by-side that they're never going to drive because they bought it just for status symbol. They're just going to sit in their yard, and then they're going to stay inside and play on social media and video games. But they're going to post about the side-by-side that they bought just so everybody knows I bought it. I wish that was a joke, but I'm talking about somebody real. Number 2, it's easy through social networking to appear to desire preeminence or to appear to consumed with the material side of life. Be careful to contextualize the good as blessings from God and to keep a grateful, Christ-centered spirit that focuses on God's goodness. And even that sometimes can come off shallow because of what you're saying. I'm so thankful that God gave me this parking space right next to the door at Walmart, but I'm going to post about it because how often does that happen? Because God really cared if you had to walk 10, 20, 30, 40 extra feet. But you're going to post about it. Thank the Lord for my breakfast. You post it every morning. He gives you food every day. Nobody else cares. Letter F. There is a lack of Christ-centered discussion. Communication on social networking can lead a person in a line of conversation in which he would never participate face-to-face. Everybody's brave behind a keyboard. Nobody has showed up to the church to tell me what they said to me on our YouTube page. Nobody. Say, well, maybe they don't live close to you. They didn't call me up on the phone either, and the link to our website's on the YouTube page. It's got all our information. I'm fairly easy to reach if I'm not out of town. The dynamic of hiding behind a screen or a screen name can make a person comfortable saying things he would otherwise never say. Just another guy said, "You're an idiot. You're a loser." Just another guy. That's his name. That's what he puts. So nobody knows who he is. Nobody cares. It's what they call a burner account or something like that, as far as I understand. Number 2, it's a place for gossip. Gossip and slander are just as damaging and sinful to social networking as they are on the telephone or face-to-face conversations. The internet helps and encourages gossip. Because I know sports, or because I watch sports, this is just some of the little bit of social media that I do understand. Tom Brady, pretty famous football player, but he's married to a supermodel, or was married to a supermodel, or is still divorcing. Whatever's happening with him and his wife, that gets posted. And then another famous football player posts a picture of himself with Tom Brady's wife. Was a teammate of Tom Brady. Well, now things are turned. Shoot on Tom Brady. Is now why they're getting divorced. And all these things kind of spiral out, all because of social media. Whereas before, you could try to amicably get a divorce without anybody knowing. It just encourages it. And number 3, what is said on the internet is never deleted or destroyed, so take heed what you say. You can talk to some of our missionaries about how hard it is to get rid of every trace of yourself on the internet. One would just be like somebody like the Shives, who he doesn't want his presentation video online. If he Googles his name, he doesn't want it associated with the fact that he's going to Keene New Hampshire to try to win these lost people to Lord. So why would he think that? Well, because other missionaries have gone to places, and then because they get Googled, and then people go and listen to some sermon or watch some of their presentation videos, they hear the bad things they say about the society. They say this is a society that's given over to idolatry or to witchcraft, or that this many people struggle with drinking. And so all of a sudden they go, oh, you don't even like us. They just missed the point. There's some that go over to places like Sri Lanka. I know David Hetzer, he's kind of a famous preacher. If you know preachers. He pastored in Idaho, and then he resigned that church, went on deputation, and then he went to Sri Lanka. Now he's coming back to California, and I have my own opinions on that. It doesn't matter between him and God. He's coming back to California now, but while he was gone, he had to pay companies to try to delete every trace of him because he didn't want in Sri Lanka for them to know he was a Christian, or it could be detrimental to him, his life, his family. They might kill him if they find out. And the amount of money they had to spend to try to just get rid of any footprint, even though he was just a pastor, it's not like he had some grand footprint. And so teenagers, be cautious what you post, the pictures you post, the things you say, they're never truly gone. They're deleted from your Facebook, sure. They're deleted from your Instagram, sure. They're deleted from your YouTube page, sure. But they exist somewhere. And somebody can find them. All right, letter G. Potential for improper male-female relationships. Men and women just meeting or that work together can assess a relationship much deeper than they should have just through a relationship, or could, I should say, than they could have just through a relationship on Facebook. This kind of access can be detrimental to marriages. By the way, now there's not even an attempt for marriage. A lot of social media is simply just there so that you can meet up with somebody, you can hook up and never see them again. It literally is the intent, to pair you with somebody that is willing to sleep with you for a night so that you can just move on with your life and never meet them or see them again. In many cases, social networking has pulled down the walls of safety and accountability, leaving singles and spouses alike vulnerable to improper male-female relationships. Make it your goal that your social network would clearly reflect the purity of Christ and that it would include everybody in your family. I encourage married couples, if you're going to have a Facebook page, have a joint Facebook page that you both are signed in on. So why would you do that? Because any comments that can be made or said to or from that Facebook account is for both of your eyes. Because it's real dangerous for anybody, and it just comes to the principle of fleeing temptation. You're supposed to even run from temptation. So if you're tempted to flirt with somebody, to comment on somebody, to make some kind of connection with somebody on the internet because of social media, well then just stay away from it. Letter H. Last one here. Oh, we did fine. Good. Becoming a stumbling block. Becoming a stumbling block. This pitfall encompasses all the previous ones. If you fall into one of the previous snares, the impact will surge through your life to those you influence. We must all express accountability, maturity, and care for other Christians who are watching our examples. Here's a big reason why I don't have social media. Because I don't ever want to hear about a teenager saying, well, my pastor had it, so I figured it was fine. I may use it right. I trust it, 30 years old, been saved for half my life. I've been trying to give my life to the Lord. I feel like I could use social media accurately if I wanted to. But that doesn't mean the teenager that looks up to me can. They're not my age. They're not as devoted to God. Hopefully they become. They're not as focused on Christ and ministry, which is my life. So they get social media because the pastor has social media, so it must be okay. But then it doesn't work for them. Because they know teenage girls. And they have other teenage boys. And their circle of influence and friends aren't the same. And they're afraid because if they delete this family member or this friend, somebody's going to be mad. So they won't. And before you know it, they stumble. And they can justify it because, well, so-and-so has one. Now that's what, again, this is personal. That's one of the reasons I don't. One of the reasons I don't. Same reason why I wouldn't use cooking wine. Oh, well, all the alcohol cooks out. I understand that. Still don't need it in my house. Because I don't need somebody to come over to my house and see cooking wine on the counter and just assume that it's not cooking wine or just assume that, oh, pastor uses it, so it's fine. Whereas for me, yeah, maybe I could use it without any trouble. Because drinking has no grasp or bearing on me simply at all. But for somebody that maybe is coming, let's say, on that wagon, comes into the pastor's home and sees it and goes, I mean, if he drinks wine, you see this? See how that correlates? I don't want you to think I'm just making stuff up about social media. I want to live above reproach, but the reality is we should all want to live above reproach. None of us should desire to be a stumbling block. Why does my wife dress the way she does? So that she's not a stumbling block to other guys. That's the intent. At home, she can dress however she wants. I don't care. We're at home. I dress however I want at home. But when we go out in public, we dress different. Why? Just so we're not a stumbling block. That's the reason. Paul said, I'll never eat meat again if it's going to be a stumbling block. If seeing me eat meat offered to idols is going to cause somebody else to sin, then I'm not doing it. That's what Paul said. He said he'd go his whole life a vegetarian. I can't do that, but I'll try. Number 2, not letter 2. Every one of us have people who are watching us and patterning their choices after what they see in our lives. Every one of us. You are patterning your life after somebody. And if you're not anymore, you did. I'm going to get to talk about my pastor here in the next sermon. This goes right in with the next sermon about watching the little things. We should each ask ourselves this question. Is there anything in my online activity that would cause a weaker Christian to stumble? And if so, probably shouldn't be there. Well, it's just social media. It's not just social media. It's the life you're portraying to anyone and everyone. Oh, well, you have to ask to be my friend to see my stuff. I don't care what kind of filters or things you think. It's still being seen by others. Here's the conclusion. There is so much more that could be said about social media. As I said at the beginning, it was a matter of how much do I keep and how much do I just delete and leave on the cutting room floor. And its blessings and pitfalls. For the sake of time, just remember, you are to be a Christian in every aspect of your life, not just your real life, but your online life too. If you're already experiencing the pitfalls of social media, it'd be a good idea to maybe step away until you're spiritually mature enough to handle them. And to teenagers, I would say, if you're planning on using it for good things, that's great. But you probably won't, so just don't. So what, you think we're immature? I think I'm immature and I'm 30. My prefrontal cortex has only been developed for 5 years. That's not that long. My brain has only been fully developed for 5 years. That means some of y'all are still a long ways off. And and for adults too, by the way, don't think, well, I'm an adult, I can handle this. That's the same kind of thought process that turns casual drinkers to alcoholics, that turn casual media viewers to pornography addicts, casual drug users to addicts. That same mentality is, I'm an adult, I can handle it. You think you can handle it. In fact, I just texted a quote that I had to write down. Let me see if I can get this right. The chains of sin are too light to notice until they're too heavy to free yourself from. Let me say that again. The chains of sin are too light to notice until they are too heavy to free yourself from. That was when I heard another guy preach. That's not Stephen original. That was one of those sermons I was listening to. But it was like, that's good. I literally, while I was driving, bad example, but I was like, I got to text this out or I'll forget it. So I texted and sent it to Holly, who was asleep. But why? Because the reality is we all think, I've got control of it until those chains are destroying your life and you can't free yourself from it. Every alcoholic person does it. Every person addicted to pornography does it. Every person addicted to some other substance. Hang on, just so we're not picking on those people. Every person that's addicted to pharmaceutical meds does it. Every person that's addicted to social media does it. Oh, I'm fine. Until they're not fine. Until a beauty pageant winner is killing herself. All right, let's pray. It's kind of a downer on it, but I'd encourage you. God gives us the principles to life. We just got to use it. Dear Heavenly Father,